She was only 19 when she was forced to marry a 49-year-old billionaire, but what he confessed on their wedding night changed everything. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain fell in silver lines against the glass windows of a small office on the upper floor of Pierce Holdings Tower. The city outside looked like it was drowning in mist, its lights smudged by the downpour. Inside, 19-year-old Lena Grace sat stiff in a leather chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her clothes were simple, her shoes still wet from the walk here, but she tried to sit tall, to look unbroken. Across from her, Alexander Pierce, the 49-year-old billionaire CEO, closed the last page of a legal document and looked up. His eyes were calm, unreadable eyes of a man used to getting what he wanted. "Miss Grace," he said evenly, sliding the document across the polished desk. "This is a marriage contract. 6 months. No intimacy, no interference in each other's personal lives. Appear with me at public events, and when the term is over, you will be free. In return, every debt your late father left will be erased." Lena's breath caught. For a moment, all she heard was the steady hum of rain and the thud of her own heartbeat. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his voice low but firm. "I am offering you a solution. I do not have time for games, Miss Grace. My board is forcing me to settle down for the sake of my reputation. I need a wife on paper. You need a way out. This is business, nothing more." Her mind raced. Images flashed: her father's hospital bed, the overdue bills piled on the kitchen table, the landlord's last warning. She wanted to scream, to say no, but the words refused to come. "What if I say no?" she asked finally, her voice shaking. "Then the bank takes your house tomorrow morning," he replied quietly. A sharp pain twisted in her chest. For a long moment, she said nothing. The rain outside grew heavier, like 1,000 tiny fists on the glass. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached for the pen lying beside the contract. "Do I at least get to keep my name?" she asked bitterly. Alexander's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "You can keep whatever makes you feel safe, Lena." She signed. Her signature bled slightly where a raindrop from her sleeve smudged the ink. Alexander stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "My lawyer will make the arrangements. The ceremony will be private. Tomorrow at noon." He hesitated, his voice quieter now. "You will have a driver waiting at 9. Lena nodded, but she barely heard him. Her world had shrunk to the thin band of silver that glinted on the table, a simple ring, far too plain for a billionaire's wife. When she picked it up, it felt heavier than gold. Outside, thunder rolled across the city as she stepped into the storm, clutching the ring like proof of something she could not name. Fear, maybe, or fate, she whispered to herself. 6 months. I can survive 6 months. But deep down, a quiet voice answered back. You have no idea how much can change in one night. The next morning, the city woke to a cold drizzle that blurred the skyline of New York. Lena stood in front of the courthouse steps, her pale hands clutching a bouquet of white lilies that did not belong to her. The petals were trembling. Or maybe it was her. She had not slept. Her reflection in the mirror that morning had looked like a ghost of the girl she used to be. 19, jobless and cornered by debt. The makeup artist had tried to make her look older, but nothing could hide the fear in her eyes. A black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and Alexander Pierce stepped out, perfectly composed in a dark tailored suit. Even in the rain, he seemed untouchable. His assistant held an umbrella over him as he walked toward her. You look presentable, he said softly, his tone more observation than compliment. Lena forced a thin smile. I will take that as approval, Mr. Pierce. He studied her face for a moment before replying. Alexander, you might as well practice saying it. You are about to be my wife. It misity aperdo. The ceremony was private, just as he had promised. No music, no guests, only the sound of rain tapping on the courthouse windows. The officiant read the vows in a flat tone. When asked if she took Alexander to be her husband, Lena hesitated just long enough for everyone in the room to notice. I do, she whispered finally. The moment the silver ring slid onto her finger, a chill passed through her. It was done. After the ceremony, Alexander offered his arm out of courtesy more than affection. She took it because she had no choice. Cameras flashed outside the building despite his request for privacy. Headlines would spin by morning, but she already knew what they would call her, the girl who sold her name for a billionaire's debt. The ride to the Pierce estate was silent. The mansion rose like a shadow against the gray sky, columns white as bone, windows tall and dark. When the car stopped, Lena hesitated before stepping out. "Welcome home," Alexander said, holding the door open. The words felt wrong. Nothing about this place could ever be home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and polish. Chandeliers glittered above marble floors. Every sound she made seemed to echo forever. A woman in a black uniform approached with a polite bow. "Mrs. Pierce, your room is prepared." Inaudible distrablet to the dome. Lena froze at the title. Mrs. Pierce. It sounded like a role meant for someone else. She nodded, following the housekeeper up the grand staircase. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of strangers who shared Alexander's sharp jaw and distant eyes. Her room was enormous, too enormous. Velvet drapes, a chandelier the size of her old apartment, and a bed that looked untouched. On the table sat a sealed envelope with her name written in neat, deliberate handwriting. She opened it. "These are the terms of our arrangement," the note said. "Do not enter my study without permission. Do not speak to the press. Attend 5 public events as my wife. When 6 months are over, you will receive the deed to your father's house in full financial freedom. No greeting, no signature, just business." That night, dinner was served in a dining hall big enough for 50 people. Only 2 chairs were occupied. The distance between them felt like a mile. Lena picked at her food, unsure if she was supposed to speak. Finally, she gathered the courage. "You do not have to pretend when we are alone. I understand this is a transaction." Alexander cut his steak with precision, never looking up. "Pretending is what we do best, Miss Grace. It is the reason people believe in love." His voice was calm, but something in it stung. She wanted to argue, but her words stuck. After dinner, he excused himself with a quiet "good night." The sound of his footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving her alone with the ticking of a distant clock. Lena walked to her balcony, watching rain collect on the marble railing. Below, the city stretched out like a field of stars blurred by fog. Somewhere out there, normal people were laughing, falling in love, building lives that were real. She looked at the ring on her finger. The silver glinted faintly under the light. It felt colder now. Inside, she whispered to herself, 6 months. But as thunder rolled in the distance, she wondered if the storm had only just begun. Days turned into weeks inside the Pierce mansion. Time seemed to move differently there, too quiet, too polished, too cold. Every morning, Lena woke in a room that looked like it belonged to a stranger, ate breakfast she could barely taste, and lived a life that did not feel like hers. Alexander kept his word. He provided everything she could need except warmth. He left early for meetings, returned late, and spoke to her only when necessary. Their lives moved in parallel lines that never met. One afternoon, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard stood waiting. "Good morning, Mrs. Pierce. I am Clara, your etiquette instructor. Mr. Pierce has arranged a short course for you how to behave at public functions." Lena blinked. "He hired someone to teach me how to be his wife?" Clara smiled thinly. "He hired me to make sure you do not embarrass him." For the next few days, Lena endured lessons on posture, speech, and table manners. She practiced how to hold a champagne glass and how to smile without showing too much emotion. Every time she made a mistake, Clara would sigh. On the 4th day, while they were rehearsing introductions, Alexander entered unexpectedly. He watched quietly from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "She is improving," Clara said carefully. "Still rough around the edges, but there is potential." The say ate a beating of the Devereuxman and hast the light from start. Alexander's gaze stayed on Lena. "Potential," he repeated, as if testing the word. Then after a pause, "Thank you, Clara. That will be all for today." When they were alone, Lena stood uncertainly. "If this is about your image, I will not ruin it," she said, trying to sound stronger than she felt. Alexander stepped closer, but his tone remained even. "This is not about image. It is about survival." The board meeting next week includes my shareholders and the media. They will want to see my wife, not a frightened girl who wishes she were invisible. His words stung, but somewhere behind them she sensed a trace of concern. That night, as she practiced walking in heels across the marble floor, she tripped. The sound of her fall echoed through the empty hallway. A door opened, and Alexander appeared again. No jacket this time, sleeves rolled up. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Just my pride," she said with a small, embarrassed laugh. Something flickered in his eyes, something human. He offered his hand to help her up, but when she took it, neither of them let go immediately. "You do not have to prove yourself to anyone," he said quietly. She looked at him, confused. "Including you?" He hesitated, then released her hand. "Especially me." The following evening, a storm rolled across the city. Lightning flashed beyond the tall windows, and the power flickered once before settling. Lena found herself wandering into the library, a massive room lined with books she could never finish in a lifetime. Alexander was there, sitting by the fire, a glass of scotch in his hand. Without looking up, he said, "You are not afraid of thunder, are you?" She smiled faintly. "Only of silence." He looked at her then, really looked. "Silence is safer. It does not judge." "Neither do I," she replied softly. For a long moment, they just sat there, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. The air felt different, less like a contract, more like the beginning of something uncertain. When she finally stood to leave, Alexander's voice followed her. "Good night, Lena." She turned at the door, surprised to hear her first name from his lips. "Good night, Alexander." For the first time since their wedding, she smiled without forcing it. And as she climbed the grand staircase, she realized that somewhere in the heart of that cold mansion, a small warmth had begun to grow. The day of the charity gala arrived, the first public event on the list of their marriage contract. The mansion was a blur of movement that morning, stylists, makeup artists, and assistants rushing through halls that suddenly felt alive. Lena stood before a mirror in a gown the color of midnight silk. It shimmered with every breath she took, though her hands still trembled. She had never worn anything so expensive, nor felt so exposed. Clara, her etiquette instructor, circled her like a hawk. "Smile with your eyes, Mrs. Pierce, and remember, pause before you speak. Confidence is silence with intention." Lena nodded, though the words barely sank in. Her mind was on Alexander. He had been distant all week, locked in meetings, his tone colder than usual. She wondered if he regretted ever making the deal. When the car arrived, Alexander was already waiting inside. He looked immaculate in a black tuxedo, his cufflinks gleaming like ice. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "You clean up well." Lena managed a small smile. "I will take that as a compliment." He glanced at her, his eyes softer than his voice. It was one. The Pierce Foundation Gala was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a place of chandeliers and whispered fortunes. Cameras flashed the moment they stepped out of the car. The crowd turned, murmuring, recognizing the billionaire who never appeared with anyone by his side. Alexander placed a hand lightly at the small of her back. "Remember, head high," he murmured. "Do not let them smell fear." Inside, the ballroom glittered like a dream. Laughter and champagne flowed freely. Lena did her best to follow Clara's rehearsed instructions. Shake hands, smile, nod, say little. Yet whispers followed wherever she went. "Who is she?" someone asked behind her. "I heard she was a college dropout," another voice replied. "She looks terrified." Lena felt the sting of every word but forced herself to keep smiling. Then came the question that froze her mid-breath. "Tell us, Mrs. Pierce," a journalist said loudly. "How does it feel to marry one of the richest men in America at 19? The microphone hovered inches from her lips. Alexander turned, his expression unreadable. Lena swallowed, her heart pounding. She could have lied, could have smiled and said something polite. Instead, she looked straight into the cameras and said quietly, "I did not marry for money. I married for a promise." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "What promise?" She lifted her chin. "A promise that debts do not define a person, that second chances can still be real." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Alexander moved beside her, placing his hand over hers in front of everyone. "That is enough for tonight," he said calmly, his voice carrying authority that silenced the crowd. He guided her away from the microphones and through the sea of flashing lights. Outside, the night air was cool, sharp with the scent of rain. They stood beneath the awning as thunder rolled faintly in the distance. "You should not have had to face that alone," Alexander said finally. Lena looked at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I did not expect you to defend me." He hesitated before answering. "Maybe I should have expected more from myself." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, quietly, she said, "Thank you." He nodded once, but his voice was different now, lower, almost gentle. "You are stronger than you think, Lena Grace." As they rode home in silence, she looked out the window at the rain streaking down the glass. For the first time since the day she signed that contract, she did not feel like a prisoner. She felt like a person again, seen and somehow safe. That night, the rain kept falling long after the gala ended. Lena lay awake, replaying every moment, the flashing cameras, the cruel whispers, and the way Alexander's hand had steadied hers before the crowd. It had not been scripted. It had not been part of the contract. It had been real. The next morning, she found him in the library, standing near the window with a cup of black coffee in his hand. The early sunlight painted soft lines across his face, making him look less like the ruthless billionaire she had met and more like a man who had forgotten how to rest. "You should be asleep," he said without turning. "I could say the same to you," she replied. He glanced over his shoulder, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Touché?" For a moment, silence filled the space between them, comfortable this time, not cold. Then Lena stepped closer. "About last night, I did not mean to embarrass you." "You did not," Alexander said simply. "You reminded a room full of liars what honesty sounds like." Lena blinked, surprised. "You are not angry?" He set the cup down. "Angry? No. Curious, maybe. You spoke about promises. What promise are you holding on to, Lena?" Her voice softened. "My father used to say that dignity is the only thing poor people can afford to keep. I promised him I would never sell mine." And suiting saps, Alexander studied her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "He raised you well." From that day, something subtle began to change. He started joining her for breakfast, sometimes even dinner. He asked about her drawings after discovering her sketchbook left open on the table. When he had to attend meetings, he would send her a short message. "Do not wait up." It was not love. Not yet. But it was a beginning. One evening, a power outage swept through the mansion. The lights flickered and died, leaving the halls bathed in moonlight. Lena lit a few candles and made her way to the main study. She found Alexander sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers and shadows. "Do you ever stop working?" she teased gently. He looked up, tired but amused. "Old habits. When you build your empire alone, you forget how to stop defending it." She hesitated before saying, "You are not alone anymore." The words hung in the air, fragile but true. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, then reached into a drawer. He pulled out the contract, the same one she had signed months ago. "It feels strange," he said quietly, "how a few pieces of paper can decide two people's lives." Lena stepped closer, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes. "Only if we let it." A distant rumble of thunder filled the silence. For a second, they stood so close that she could hear his breath. Then, as if realizing it, he looked away. "Good night, Lena." She smiled softly. "Good night, Alexander." That night, as she returned to her room, Lena found herself touching the silver ring on her finger. For the first time, it no longer felt like a shackle. It felt like a question waiting to be answered. Outside, the storm had stopped. The sky was clearing, piece by piece, like something in both of them had begun to heal. Neither of them knew it yet, but the wall between contract and connection had just begun to crack, and once it did, there would be no turning back. The following weeks passed quietly, almost peacefully. For the first time, the mansion did not feel like a cage to Lena. She began waking early, walking through the rose garden at sunrise, sketching the way the light hit the marble fountains. Sometimes she would find Alexander there before her, reading the paper with a cup of coffee in hand. Their conversations grew longer. He asked about her childhood, about the small town she came from, and about the father she still spoke of with warmth. In return, he shared pieces of his life, how he had built Pierce Holdings from nothing after losing his parents, how he had learned that power came at the cost of peace. One morning she noticed the way his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his cup. "Are you all right?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. An old injury, nothing serious. But later that day, she found him in his study, gripping his wrist, pain etched across his face. Without thinking, she rushed to his side. You should not ignore that. He looked at her, startled by the concern in her voice. You are not my doctor. Maybe not, she said softly, but someone should care if you hurt. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. I have not heard that tone in a long time. That evening, she brought him tea with honey for the pain. When he thanked her, their fingers brushed. The touch was brief, accidental, but it lingered long after she left the room. Days later, they attended another event together, a board dinner with investors. It was supposed to be routine. Lena sat quietly beside him, poised and calm, until one of the older board members leaned in with a smirk. Quite the age gap, Mr. Pierce, the man said, loud enough for the table to hear. What is your secret? Money or charm? The table erupted in laughter. Lena's face burned. Before she could speak, Alexander's voice cut through the noise, steady and sharp. My wife, he said, emphasizing the word, deserves your respect. I suggest you find some before you finish that drink. Silence fell over the table. The man stammered an apology. Lena looked at Alexander, surprised by the quiet fierceness in his defense. On the drive home, she broke the silence. You did not have to do that. He glanced at her, the city lights flickering across his face. Yes, I did. Why? She asked. Because they were wrong about you, he said simply. And maybe about me too. That night, as they walked into the mansion, thunder rumbled in the distance again. But this storm felt different, softer, the kind that brings rain without destruction. Later, unable to sleep, Lena found herself in the kitchen, stirring a cup of cocoa. She did not expect Alexander to walk in, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, looking more human than she had ever seen him. Could not sleep either? He asked. She shook her head. Too many thoughts. He nodded. Me too. They sat across from each other at the counter, sharing quiet laughter about nothing important. Then, as the clock struck midnight, their eyes met no longer, as strangers bound by paper, but as two people learning what trust feels like. When Lena finally whispered, "Good night, Alexander," her voice carried something new, something warm, unguarded, and real. And for the first time, he whispered it back, not out of courtesy, but from somewhere deep within his heart. The calm did not last. Peace never stayed long in Alexander Pierce's world. It began with a headline. One morning, as Lena came down for breakfast, she found the housekeeper frozen by the television screen. The words scrolled across the news ticker in bright red. Pierce marriage under fire. Is it all a contract? Her hands turned cold. The screen showed pictures from the gala, her nervous smile, his distant expression, their silence caught in frozen frames. Beneath it, an anonymous insider claimed their marriage was a business arrangement meant to protect Pierce Holdings' image. Lena's breath caught as she saw the name of the source, Richard Hale, Alexander's former assistant. By the time she reached the study, Alexander was already there, phone pressed to his ear, his jaw tight with anger. You will retract that statement immediately, he said into the receiver. His tone was calm but deadly. If you do not, I will make sure you never work in this city again. He ended the call, his face like stone. Lena stood in the doorway, her voice small. It is true, though, the contract. If they dig deeper, they will find it. Alexander looked up sharply. Do you think I care about gossip? You should, she whispered. It is your company, your reputation. He hesitated, then said quietly, It is not my reputation I am worried about. Before she could ask what he meant, the phone rang again, his lawyer this time. The board was calling an emergency meeting. Investors were panicking. Shares were already dropping. Within an hour, Alexander was gone, leaving only silence and the echo of slammed doors. By afternoon, the paparazzi had gathered outside the gates. Headlines spread faster than truth. Gold digger bride, the billionaire's deal. Even her old classmates from her small town began calling, asking if the rumors were true. That night, Lena sat alone in the darkened library, the contract open on the table before her. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She could not remember when the paper had stopped feeling like protection and started feeling like a prison. When Alexander returned, exhaustion lined his face. His tie was loose, his eyes shadowed. The board wants me to annul the marriage, he said quietly. They think ending it will save the company. Lena stared at him. And what do you think? He met her gaze, and for the first time his voice trembled. I think walking away from you would be the biggest mistake of my life. She looked down, struggling to speak. Then tell them the truth. Tell them I did not marry you for money. It will not matter, he said bitterly. They will never believe it. She wiped her tears, her tone firm now. Then let me go, before they destroy you for keeping me. Alexander took a step forward, but she backed away. Lena, do not say that. I have to, she said, her voice breaking. You gave me freedom the day I signed this paper. Maybe it is time I finally use it. She placed the contract on his desk, the silver ring beside it, and whispered, Goodbye, Alexander. When she walked out into the night, the city lights blurred through her tears. Behind her, the mansion that had once been her prison now felt like something else entirely, home and heartbreak both at once. Inside, Alexander stood alone, the storm outside matching the one inside his chest. For the first time in years, the man who had everything realized he had nothing left worth keeping except the woman who had just walked away. 3 weeks passed. The city kept moving. But for Alexander Pierce, time had stopped. His mansion, once alive with motion and conversation, had fallen into silence. Every room echoed with her absence, the untouched teacup on the balcony, the empty chair at the breakfast table, the faint scent of lavender that lingered in the hallways. Lena had vanished from his world as quietly as she had entered it. No forwarding address, no phone calls, no trace. She had returned to the small neighborhood where her father's house once stood, now working at a bookstore to pay her rent. It was the kind of quiet life she had once dreamed of, but it did not feel like freedom anymore. Every night she thought of his voice, his guarded smile, and the way he had said her name. But she reminded herself, it was just a contract. It was never meant to be real. Then one evening, as she was closing the shop, a familiar black car pulled up to the curb. Her breath caught when she saw him step out, dressed not in his usual armor of a suit, but in a simple gray coat. The rain had just begun to fall, soft and steady. Alexander, she whispered, unable to stop herself. He stopped a few feet away, rain soaking his hair. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, I did not come here to take you back. I came to tell you the truth. In another way for bread, it is not word, and the braid not of his part. Lena crossed her arms, trying to steady her shaking hands. The truth? About what? About our wedding night, he said. His voice trembled slightly, stripped of the confidence she had always known. You asked me once why I looked so distant that night. I never answered. She nodded, eyes wary but curious. He took a breath. That night, I could not touch you. Not because I did not want to, but because I did. I realized I was afraid that if I reached for you, it would not be business anymore. It would be real. And I had no idea how to handle real. Lena's throat tightened. You could have told me that before everything fell apart. I should have, he admitted. But I was a coward. I spent my life controlling every detail, every deal, every loss, except you. You were the first thing I could not manage. She shook her head, tears forming. You hurt me, Alexander. You made me believe I was nothing more than an arrangement. I know, he said softly. That is why I am here. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small silver ring, the same one he had placed on her finger months ago. I kept it, he said, not because of what it meant legally, but because it was the first thing that felt honest. I came to return it, or to ask if you will let me earn the right to put it back on your hand. The rain fell harder now, but neither of them moved. Lena stared at the ring, then at him. This is not about saving your company, is it? She asked. He shook his head. No, the company is fine. I am not. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Lena took a step forward, the streetlight reflecting in her eyes. You said once that silence was safer, she whispered. But love is not supposed to be safe, Alexander. He smiled faintly, tears mixing with the rain. Then maybe I am finally ready to take the risk. She looked at the ring once more, her heart pounding, and said, Then show me it was never about a contract. It's a donk tang. As the rain fell around them, Alexander slipped the ring back onto her finger, not as a symbol of a deal, but of a choice freely made. And for the first time, both of them understood that their story had never been about debt or duty. It had always been about courage, the courage to love when everything else said you should not. A month later, the headlines changed. What began as a scandal had turned into something else entirely. Billionaire Alexander Pierce donates half his fortune to educational foundations. Pierce couple spotted at charity event together again. But behind the noise, the truth was quieter, simpler, and far more human. Lena and Alexander had returned to the city, not to repair an image, but to rebuild a life. The mansion that once echoed with silence now felt alive again. The walls carried laughter, piano notes, and the sound of two people learning how to belong to the same world. Alexander no longer spent endless nights buried in work. He started each morning with Lena in the garden, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise spill gold across the stone path. She sketched, he read, and for the first time, he did not feel the need to control the clock. One afternoon, while they were organizing a scholarship event in her father's name, Alexander turned to her and said quietly, "You once told me dignity is the only thing the poor can afford to keep. You were wrong, Lena." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, really? And what did I miss?" He smiled. "Love. Love is what keeps us alive when dignity runs out." Her laugh was soft, but there were tears behind it. "You finally learned how to talk like a poet." "Only because I found the right muse," he said. That night, they hosted a small gathering at the Pierce Foundation Hall. It was the same place where the world had once whispered about their contract marriage. Now, they stood together before the audience as equals. Alexander took the microphone and spoke clearly, his tone steady but warm. "Months ago, I made a promise to clear a debt and protect my company. But along the way, I met someone who taught me what real value means. She taught me that wealth cannot buy peace, that power cannot replace kindness, and that love is not a transaction." He turned toward Lena, his voice trembling slightly. "So tonight, in front of everyone, I want to make a different kind of promise. No contracts, no conditions, just truth." Lena looked at him, tears shining under the soft lights. He stepped closer, took her hand, and said, "Will you marry me again?" "Not for 6 months. For life." The room fell silent. Then applause filled the hall as she nodded, unable to speak through the emotion. He slipped a new ring onto her finger, a gold band engraved with a single word inside: freedom. Later, as they stood outside under the city lights, Lena whispered, "It feels strange to start over where everything once fell apart." Alexander smiled. "Maybe that is the only place it could truly begin." The wind carried the scent of rain, but the night was clear. She leaned her head against his shoulder as he wrapped his arm around her. For the first time, there were no secrets left between them. No contracts, no debts, only choice. Vio, softly, "Sometimes love is not born from perfection, but from redemption. And when two broken hearts choose to heal together, even the coldest mansion can become a home." As they walked back inside, the lights behind them glowed warm against the dark, a quiet reminder that every storm eventually leads to dawn. Title card read aloud. She was only 19 when she was forced to marry a 49-year-old billionaire, but what he confessed changed everything. In the end, love was not the deal they signed. It was the life they built.